No matter how many westerns you've watched, nothing grips the imagination like those legendary high noon standoffs. The kind where a sheriff and a wanted outlaw face off in deadly silence, hands hovering near their holsters as the whole town holds its breath. It's the ultimate showdown of skill, nerve, and speed. A test to see who truly commands their weapon. But here's the twist, those classic duels? They're more myth than memory. Real-life shootouts were rarely so clean or dramatic. And if you've ever heard how Wild Bill Hickok met his end, shot in the back of the head while holding a hand of cards, you know the Old West wasn't about fair fights. Still, if Western movie characters seem brutally intense, it's because they were shaped by the chaos and cruelty of the real men who once roamed the frontier. Stick around to the end of this video because we're diving deep into the deadliest duels in Old West history, starting with a man who carried fire in his blood, Jim Miller. His fuse was so short, he reportedly took a man's life after a petty argument. But Jim's story didn't begin with blood. He was born in Van Buren, Arkansas, but raised in the dusty heartlands of Franklin, Texas, after his family relocated when he was a toddler. His father, Jacob Miller, worked as a stonemason and helped construct the original Capitol building in Austin. Then tragedy came knocking. After Jacob's untimely death, Jim's mother moved the family to Avent, Texas. But in 1869, when Jim was just 8 years old, his grandparents were found brutally murdered in their home. No one ever proved who did it. Jim was arrested but never tried. He moved in with his sister Georgia and her husband, John Thomas Coop, near Gatesville. Their tense relationship came to a brutal end in 1884 when Jim murdered Coop in his sleep. Though convicted and sentenced, a technicality overturned it, and Jim's dark legacy truly began. Despite a trail of murder charges and overturned convictions, Jim Miller somehow found himself wearing a badge. He joined the Texas Rangers and served as a resident ranger in Memphis, eventually transferring to Hall County. But even with a lawman's title, his violent ways never changed. While operating in nearby Collingsworth County, Jim gunned down another man, another death he justified in the line of duty. In the scorching summer of 1902, his rampage continued. That year, Jim killed 2 men and seriously wounded another in Ward County. He claimed the trio were cattle rustlers, caught red-handed, but many suspected the truth was murkier. John Wesley Hardin. Then there was John Wesley Hardin, a name still whispered with fear. He killed for the first time at 15. By the time he was done, that number may have reached 44. Some say 21. Hardin claimed 44. Either way, he was among the deadliest duelists to ever live. A gambler, a cattle hustler, and a man with a Bible name but a devil's hand. Hardin lived like judgment would never find him. He wasn't just ruthless, he was confident in his own legend. Even with a $4,000 bounty on his head, he roamed free, gambling, drinking, and even seducing another man's wife. His parents had named him after the founder of Methodism, hoping for righteousness. But John Wesley Hardin chose carnage. He once claimed he only killed men who deserved it, but his own stories betrayed him, like the time a man's loud snoring annoyed him in an Abilene hotel. Hardin banged on the wall, no response, so he fired through it, intending only to scare. But the snoring stopped forever. He'd killed the man in his sleep, and yet that wasn't even his most infamous moment. That would come on his 21st birthday in 1874. The day legend truly took hold. Doc Holliday. One name always rides alongside the legends of the West, John Henry Doc Holliday. Born August 14, 1851, Doc's life was steeped in sorrow from a young age. He was only 15 when he lost his beloved mother to tuberculosis, a wound that never quite healed. Despite the tragedy, Doc pushed forward, earning a degree in dental surgery and beginning his practice in Atlanta with Dr. Arthur C. Ford. But fate was cruel. Not long into his career, Doc learned he too had contracted tuberculosis, most likely from his mother, or possibly his adopted Mexican brother, who also died from the disease. Faced with a death sentence, doctors advised him to move west toward a drier climate. So in October 1873, Doc packed his bags and headed to Dallas, Texas, the edge of the railroad and, symbolically, the frontier of his new life. But dentistry became impossible as his health deteriorated. He turned to gambling. which he mastered with his sharp mind. But that life came with danger. Knowing he needed protection, Doc took to practicing with a six-shooter and a long-bladed knife. The man once known for fixing teeth was becoming a man who could take lives. It wasn't long before his new skills were tested. On January 2nd, 1875, Doc clashed with Austin, a local saloon owner, over a heated disagreement. What began as a shouting match exploded into a gunfight. Bullets flew in both directions, but miraculously, no one was hit. The two men were arrested, but the legend of Doc Holliday had begun to take shape. At first, Doc Holliday's gunfight antics were almost viewed with amusement by the locals. A sickly dentist-turned-gambler with a temper and a pistol made for interesting saloon gossip. But that perception darkened fast. Just days after his standoff with Austin, Doc clashed again, this time with a prominent citizen who wasn't so lucky. In a sudden and sharp exchange, Doc fired two perfectly placed bullets, ending the man's life. Frank Buckskin Leslie. Frank Leslie wasn't just a gunslinger. He was a storm of rage wrapped in buckskin and blood. Violent by nature, worse when drunk, he carved out a reputation that chilled even the rowdiest corners of the Old West. He earned the nickname Buckskin during his service as an Army scout in the brutal Plains Indian Wars. But his most infamous chapter began in Tombstone, Arizona, where he opened the Cosmopolitan Hotel in the heart of a mining town already simmering with tension. It didn't take long for blood to stain the walls. In a heated dispute over a woman, Mike Killeen's wife, Frank drew and killed Killeen. It was ruled self-defense, but the ink wasn't dry on the death notice before Leslie married the widow. The people whispered, but nothing stuck. 2 years later, he pistol-whipped a man so viciously outside the Oriental Saloon that fear took hold of Tombstone. Whispers turned to warnings. They said he was involved in the mysterious death of gunslinger John Ringo. No proof, no trial, but Billy Claiborne, a close friend of Ringo, was convinced. He called out Leslie in a fury, demanding justice. Leslie answered with bullets. Claiborne hit the dirt, dead before his vengeance left his lips. Even among the violent and vile, Leslie was extreme, an unpredictable force that even killers feared. John King Fisher was chaos wearing a crown. His story reads like a paradox, a man both criminal and sheriff. Born in Collin County in 1854 to Joby and Lucinda Fisher, his early life moved with the war winds. The family relocated to Florence, Williamson County, just before the Civil War broke loose. But by 1869, at just 15, Fisher found himself on the wrong side of the law, accused of horse theft. The truth? He'd borrowed the animal without permission. A posse caught him, but the horse's owner, softening, declined to press charges and even helped him escape. It was Fisher's first brush with justice. It wouldn't be the last. Fisher drifted south to Goliad, where he was arrested again, this time for housebreaking. He did a short stint in prison, but after 4 months, he was pardoned and headed for Dimmitt County. There, in the raw, lawless expanse of the Nueces Strip, Fisher found fertile ground for reinvention. He staked a claim on Pendencia Creek and built a ranch. But it wasn't just livestock he raised, it was power. The Strip was ruled by violence and rustlers, and Fisher played both sides with unnerving ease. He welcomed drifters and outlaws, offering refuge for the price of loyalty. His ranch became legend. One road into it bore a sign carved in rough letters. "This is King Fisher's Road. Take the other." People believed it, because anyone who didn't often vanished. Fisher's reign was lawless but organized, brutal but respected. And just like that, he decided to step into the light. By 1881, Fisher made a stunning pivot. He was appointed deputy sheriff of Uvalde County, and to everyone's shock, he thrived. He kept the peace. He cleaned up the streets. He became, by all accounts, a fair, effective lawman. People even liked him. The same man who once shot rustlers without blinking now talked about justice, order, and running for office in 1884. It was a transformation few could understand and fewer trusted. But John King Fisher, it seemed, was ready to trade his blood-stained past for a lawful future, at least for a little while. But everything changed on the night of March 11th, 1884, inside the Vaudeville Variety Theater in San Antonio. It was supposed to be just another lively night in a city known for its music, laughter, and drink. Bass Reeves entered life on the lowest rung imaginable, a slave child born in 1838, deep in the American South, in Crawford County, Arkansas. His parents were owned by William Reeves, a slaveholder whose surname Bass, like many, inherited. His first name came from his grandfather, Bass Washington, a quiet nod to a lineage that had strength hidden behind shackles. As a child, Bass worked as a water boy, hauling buckets beneath the cruel sun until he was old enough to break soil in the fields alongside his parents. In 1846, the entire household, Reeves family, slaves, livestock, was uprooted and moved to Grayson County, Texas. It was there that young Bass would be handed over to George Reeves, William's son, who would drag Bass into the blood-soaked chaos of the Civil War. How Bass gained his freedom remains partly shrouded in mystery. Some say he escaped after a violent argument. Others say the war's end simply gave him wings. But by the time the 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery in 1865, Bass Reeves had already begun carving out a life on his own terms. He returned to Arkansas, a free man with calloused hands and a stubborn spirit, and began farming near Van Buren with his wife and children. The quiet life suited him until 1875, when history came knocking. Judge Isaac Parker, soon to be known as the hanging judge, was newly appointed to the Indian Territory and needed someone who could help tame the chaos. He turned to U.S. Marshal James F. Fagan, who in turn had heard whispers of a man, Bass Reeves, who knew the land like his own skin and spoke the languages of the local tribes. Reeves was more than a tracker. He was a bridge between two worlds. Fagan recruited him, and history was made. Bass Reeves became the first black U.S. deputy marshal west of the Mississippi River. But more than that, he became a symbol of justice wielded with dignity, strength, and an unshakable moral compass. In his time as a deputy, Bass rode through 1,000 miles of dust, tracking murderers, outlaws, and fugitives who underestimated the quiet man in the saddle. He wore many disguises: cowboy, preacher, drifter. Sometimes he posed as the very men he hunted, but behind every mask was the same deadly focus and unmatched skill. He didn't talk big. He let his six-shooter speak. One such moment came in 1889, when Reeves went after Tom Story's gang, a ring of notorious horse thieves operating in Texas. The marshals had chased them before, unsuccessfully. Wild Bill. But he wasn't born with that name. His mother had called him James Butler Hickok, a far gentler title than the legend he'd become. Still, Hickok's life was too dangerous, too unrelenting, too blood-soaked to wear any name other than Wild Bill. He was perhaps the most famous man ever to pass through Deadwood, even though his time there lasted only a handful of weeks. Arriving in July 1876, flanked by the equally notorious Colorado Charlie Utter and the wild-hearted Calamity Jane, Hickok stepped into town already known from coast to coast. He had made a living as a gambler, gunslinger, soldier, and scout. Before the Civil War, he worked as a teamster, steering freight wagons across rugged terrain. But it was in Rock Creek Station, Nebraska Territory, that Hickok's story began to take a darker turn. He had a tense history with a man named David McCandless, who claimed Wild Bill cheated him in a land deal. When the dispute boiled over, Wild Bill did what he knew best. He drew his weapon and left McCandless dead in the dust. But the same wildness that made him feared would also mark his fall. Porter Rockwell was a bodyguard, a killer, a saint, and a sinner, sometimes all at once. He was best known as the fiercely loyal protector of Joseph Smith Jr., founder of the Mormon Church. But Rockwell's legacy extended far beyond religious loyalty. His reputation was carved in gun smoke and iron will. There's mystery in his birth itself. Some records say June 28, 1813, others June 25, 1815, but all agree he was born for conflict. As a boy, Porter befriended the slightly older Joseph Smith, and that relationship would shape his entire destiny. When the church began its fateful journey westward, the Rockwell family followed Joseph Smith from New York to Ohio, then later to Jackson County, Missouri, which they believed would be their sacred gathering ground. There, Rockwell was baptized on April 6, 1830, the very day the Latter-day Saint movement was officially born. From that moment forward, he considered his purpose holy: defend the prophet, defend the church, and defend the law, even if it meant stepping into moral gray zones. He didn't write diaries. He didn't ask forgiveness. He let his guns tell the story. Billy the Kid gets more headlines than any other gunslinger in the Old West. It's because his story was written in youth and tragedy. The myth began with a boy named Henry McCarty, who was forced to grow up before he ever had a chance to be a child. After losing his father early, life turned crueler still. His mother, the only steady light in his life, succumbed to tuberculosis, the slow-moving killer that swept across frontier towns with merciless indifference. Orphaned alongside his younger brother, Billy was taken into foster care, shuffled through homes that offered little warmth. At just 14, he found work at a hotel, scrubbing dishes and serving tables with a smile that hid his burdens. He was kind, helpful, and well-liked, especially by the manager who saw in him nothing more than a good kid with a hard past. That illusion shattered on September 23, 1875, when Billy was arrested, not for murder, but for hiding a stolen bundle of clothes for a friend. It stunned the people who knew him, especially the manager who had trusted him deeply. 2 days into jail, Billy proved that bars could not hold him. Thin and wiry, he climbed the jailhouse chimney and disappeared into the night. That moment marked the birth of the outlaw known as Billy the Kid. He had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back. Alone and without options, he eventually crossed paths with Jesse Evans, leader of a ruthless gang called the Boys, known for horse thievery and violence. Billy had no home, no family, and in a land ruled by guns and gangs, solitude was suicide. So reluctantly, he joined. Within weeks, Billy was obeying orders and pulling triggers. His hands were no longer clean. He roamed the land stealing livestock, not just from white ranchers, but even from the Apache on the Mescalero Reservation. With crimes stacking against him, Billy tried to bargain for his freedom by agreeing to testify against fellow outlaws. But betrayal met him again. The authorities denied the promised pardon, locking him up. Once again, Billy lived up to his legend. He slipped his cuffs, vanished like a ghost, and resumed his life on the run. But fate was not done shaping his story. Billy struck up a strange friendship with Pat Garrett, a man who would later become the sheriff of Lincoln County. Their bond didn't last. When Garrett took office, he was ordered to hunt down his old companion, now known everywhere as Billy the Kid. By then, Billy had formed his own gang, simply known as the Rustlers, who lived off stolen cattle, raiding ranches to survive. On December 15, 1880, the governor of New Mexico, Lew Wallace, placed a $500 bounty on Billy's head. That bounty would set in motion one of the most relentless manhunts in the annals of Western justice. Garrett laid out countless traps and ambushes in hopes of catching Billy the Kid, but Billy moved like an animal with a sixth sense for danger. That instinct kept him free until it didn't. On December 23, 1880, Billy and his band of rustlers were finally captured. Horn carved his most infamous legacy. He began with the Pinkerton Detective Agency, hunting outlaws who threatened powerful clients, banks, railroads, and private investors who wanted justice faster than the law could deliver. After 4 years, Horn was restless. In 1894, he signed up as a hired gun for the Wyoming Cattlemen's Association. By then, Wyoming cattlemen were locked in a bloody turf war with small farmers and rustlers in Johnson County. After facing bad press, the ranchers turned to silent revenge. Horn became their enforcer, executing anyone they labeled a threat, striking from shadows and never leaving witnesses. Horn was lethal and unflinching. He could kill from 200 yards, often before his targets even saw danger coming. Many never saw their killer at all. But on November 20th, 1903, Tom Horn was hanged for allegedly killing 14-year-old Willie Nickel, the son of a Wyoming sheep rancher. Sam Bass was a famous outlaw and train robber who led not one, but 2 infamous gangs in the Wild West. Yet he began as a likable, honest young man. His life changed when he bought a spirited little sorrel race pony. Every Saturday in Denton, while boys gathered for races, Bass and his horse kept winning. But Jesse James wasn't just a legend. He was a killer, a thief, a terrorist. His gang left a trail of blood, and after a string of brutal losses, Jesse needed people he could trust. He found that in the Ford brothers. He brought them into his home, never knowing he'd invited betrayal into his family. Suspicion grew in Jesse's mind, but instead of acting, he paced around, gun in hand. When he turned to dust off a picture on the wall, Robert Ford saw his chance. As Jesse reached up, Robert drew his pistol and shot Jesse James in the back of the head. The Ford brothers had sold out their friend for a government reward. And that was how the legend of Jesse James came to an end. Thank you for watching.